Going again.
I'm trying to think of a funny answer.
Like an answer, like moments.
Slippery When Wet's a different story. Because for me, if I listen to that album, I'm going to do both. I'm going to pick up the guitar.
Tommy Rockit,
Brian,
thanks for joining us.
thanks for having me, man.
So,
Good.
so for many people who know you, you're the lead frontman in the Dublin hard rock outfit Stone Trigger.
That's right.
You recently just got off a tour with Tracy Guns, formerly of LA Guns, and you just released a new EP called Black Venom.
That's right.
So we're here to talk about, your craft in general, which is hard rock and glam rock as a musical form.
Yeah.
So, like, in your own words, how would you explain, like, what is hard rock or what is glam rock?
Well, hard rock and glam rock are two slightly different things. From a glam rock point of view, which is more or less what we do, it's more of a visual experience than just the audio experience. Hard rock bands go out, they play, they put on just a rock and roll show, and that's it. Whereas the glam is more centered around what the style of the band and what you're doing as part of your show. Kind of gimmicks, extras. What the guys are wearing, how they look, makeup, hair. So the glam rock side of things is just a little bit more kind of extravagant than just plain old hard rock.
Because it really rose like in the 70s. You the likes of T-Rex and David Bowie.
Yeah.
What do you think were the biggest characteristics of like this explosion of this new form of rock and roll?
Yeah, well, it kind of went from the late 60s, where the Beatles were doing the Sgt. Pepper kind of thing, and Mark Bolan came along and he was wearing glitter and eyeliner and, women's clothes and stuff like that. And I think that the aspect was that, the whole freedom of speech was coming along. Women had a voice, and men were like, we can wear women's clothes too. And that was kind of the very early 70s kind of buzz off. And then it was the whole, hippie movement had just happened, and people were all about peace and love and sex, and people wanted to sell sex. And that was kind of the beginning of, kind of Mark Bolan getting up there. He's a handsome looking guy, and the chicks just really wanted to have somebody to look up to, and he kind of spun off the whole glam rock thing onto the likes of David Bowie and people who followed in their footsteps.
So you think that the whole sexual charisma was like one of the biggest pushes?
Yeah, absolutely. It was all about sex. Sex was a word that people could say then. They were just allowed to say it in around that kind of era. Before then, it was taboo. People dare not mention the word. And all of a sudden now, sex is in songs. It's in song titles. It's in lyrics, and and it's on your television screen too.
As like the 70s came into the 80s, like we saw the breakthrough of like acts like Def Leppard and Bon Jovi, these massive stadium rock acts.
Yeah.
And like, what do you think, as from an industrial kind of perspective, what do you think were the biggest factors that led to their like success?
Yeah, well, like I was saying, the Alice Cooper, becoming big in the US kind of in the mid to late 70s really got the juices flowing with the young generation over there. I think by the time that they matured to go and be in bands themselves, the MTV generation was just beginning. Kind of I think it was in around 1983, and people were seeing how a music video could, elevate somebody's career. For example, Thriller and Michael Jackson. Thanks to that video and obviously the quality of the record, but the video, more so to speak, made more available for more people to hear. So it made the record available to more people, and it became the biggest selling album of all time. So I think the rock bands wanted to get in on that. I remember hearing the quote from Mutt Lange when they were going to make Hysteria with Def Leppard, and he said he wanted it to be a rock and roll thriller. And I think to an extent that album did become, a hit after hit type album. But it's all thanks to the MTV generation and, television and the whole platform that people had that they didn't have in the 70s. There's music television now, and bands maybe that didn't quite deserve or wouldn't have made it in the 70s had that platform of going off and making a really cool music video and getting out to an audience that, they may not have done a few years prior.
And as you're saying that, like, with the success of these major acts, like the critical response, like the response from the media, the parents, the young generations, the old generations. You know, it varied greatly. You know.
Yeah, well, there's one thing sure about rock and roll, whether it's hard rock or glam rock or heavy metal. If your parents hated it, well, the kids loved it, and that was the kind of real selling point for a lot of these bands. The whole parental guidance sticker on the records came from the Filthy 15 that was fronted by Tipper Gore, Al Gore's wife, and you had the likes of her saying that songs were about sexual bondage and so on and so forth. And Dee Snider had to go into court to sing with Twisted Sister and talk about this. And he talked about the song. I think it's called Under the Blade or Under the Knife, and he said that the song was about the drummer's throat operation. And he said, but when I write a song and you listen to it, you take what you want from that song and you find what you were looking for in her lyrics. And he said Tipper Gore was looking for sexual bondage and whatever. He said, and she found it in that song. It shocked the court, and everybody was like, oh, you can't say that, that's Tipper Gore. So there was that kind of parents, don't listen to that kind of stuff response. And then there was the kind of trash metalers look on, guys walking around wearing eyeliner and hairspray and, perms in their hair, so there was kind of looked on as a little bit more of a poncy version of rock by those people. Then there was just the people who didn't like rock and roll and just didn't want to like it as well. So there's always going to be people who give you a little bit of flack about, wearing eyeliner and back home in your hair and stuff like that. But, at the end of the day, that's who you are. That's what the genre's all about.
All right, so let's talk about the characteristics of like a live performance, like say like a band like yourselves, or if anyone who's seen Stone Trigger or a major like artist like the Bon Jovi or Def Leppard, we realize that the ethics of their live performance is, there are certain like elements that make like their live performance. Like, what do you think these things are like?
Well, there's a difference between us, our show and a Bon Jovi show, merely because they're playing in bigger places and they have a higher budget than we do. But the whole aspect of what it comes down to really is as you're putting on a spectacle for the audience, not just what you're hearing or how the guys are playing, but what's going on around them. You go to see Kiss or Motley Crue or somebody, you've got pyrotechnics. Recently I seen a video where Tommy Lee is on a loop-de-loop roller coaster as he's doing his drum solo, and that's what the glam rock kind of heavy metal end of things is really about. It's about getting people, totally into a fantasy as you go to see a show. If you're paying big bucks to go and see a band, you don't just want to hear them playing, especially in our genre. You want to see the whole performance. When we put on a show, we're restricted financially because we're a self-financed band. But we still try to make it as big as possible. A big sound is very important. Your catchy choruses, your big hooks, getting the crowd involved. Involving the crowd into your show means that it's become a more enjoyable show for the people that have come to your show because, they see you having fun. They want to have fun. You're interacting with them. We've got confetti cannons, we've got smoke machines, we've got lasers, we've got as much as we can afford to get into our shows, and you just want people really walking away saying, you know what, those guys really put on a show, and I really enjoyed it. Because at the end of the day, the music that we play, whether it's Stone Trigger or whether it's Def Leppard or whether it's Van Halen, it's good time rock and roll, and it's all for the benefit of the people who are coming to see us enjoyment.
I was absolutely swimming in confetti the last time I was at Stone Trigger game.
Yeah, good.
So right in front of the stage, covered in confetti, swimming.
Brilliant.
So, but unfortunately, like at the start of the 1990s, like when guys like me were being born, like the genre unfortunately lost popularity. With the outbreak of grunge, the likes of the Nirvanas, the Pearl Jam, the Soundgardens, But what do you think was responsible for that?
Yeah, like I say, I was only a kid then as well. In around the 93, 94 mark, I was only 9 or 10. So I'm lucky enough that I'm old enough to remember it. But I think the fact that there was just so many bands doing the same thing. There was the cream of the crop, the Guns N' Roses, the Bon Jovis, the Aerosmiths, who, rose to the top. But then behind them, there was a million bands who looked the same, who sounded the same, who were doing the same thing, singing about the same thing. And, musically, they were just singing about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And, that's great. But everybody was doing it. And they were just doing it to a point where I think people just got sick and tired of it. And they just had enough. And the whole kind of Nirvana, R.E.M., Pearl Jam, Red Hot Chili Peppers they were all kind of just coming through, and they were something different. They were, they weren't glammed up. They had no gimmicks, no nothing. They were stripped down, and I think people just say, you know what, this is fresh, and I think bands just became uncool overnight almost. Def Leppard released an album kind of in '95, and it was just like, oh god, we're kind of embarrassed to say that we like Def Leppard now because they're not cool anymore. But as time has gone by, it has kind of come back. Bands have become, that weren't cool in the '80s, embarrassing in the mid '90s, have kind of come back in their classic rock now. They would not be considered that then, but they are now.
So again, with you sitting here today, we learned that hard rock, glam rock, it's still alive.
Oh yeah.
Regardless of whether it's the mainstream or the underground. But what do you think has in store? What do you think we have in store for the future? The
future,
the genre.
I think the future is bright from an aspect that there will always be bands influenced by T-Rex and Bowie and all the way up through to the 80s bands, like Van Halen and David Lee Roth. These kind of guys are pinnacles of their profession, and I think that as long as their music survives, that there'll always be people who want to play that music. There's great bands like Reckless Love. There's great bands like the Burning Crows who are going on tour with The Treatment, who we've played with previously. These are guys who are carrying the flag. Unfortunately, they're not getting the opportunities that the bands from the 70s and 80s once had of MTV or anything like that. But we have the internet now, and it's a great platform for discovering new bands. Do I think they'll ever reach the heights where they're going to be hit number one in mainstream charts? Probably not. But I would love to think that one day, everything comes in waves, as they say, that hard rock or heavy metal or ideally glam rock, which would be fantastic, and Stone Trigger in particular would go and reach the heights that Guns N' Roses did or Alice Cooper did all the way back through the 70s and 80s. And I would really love to think that the young bands, even the next generation, even my kids, could go and take that genre back to where it belongs, because I think it belongs at the top. There's a lot of reality shows, a lot of plastic musicians, and people who just don't deserve to be where they are and get the hype that they're getting. But there's bands out slugging it 7 nights a week playing rock and roll. Bands like Stone Trigger, bands like Burning Crows and Still Room, Blue Sun, Saints Boulevard, they're slugging it every night of the week just to get to the next stage of the ladder. I think that as long as bands have the hunger that all the above have, I think that rock and roll, no matter what the genre is a bright future.
Exactly. So we better mention Stone Trigger now. So you guys have been together 3 or 4 years now?
We're together since 2009.
2009.
Yeah. So.
And it was this year that things really took off.
Yeah, in the last few years, we've been lucky enough to get a few support slots for some higher profile musicians, like John Corabi from Motley Crue, Faster Pussycat, The Treatment, to name a few. And then this year, things really took off, and we got offered to go on tour with Tracy Guns, who was, of course, the guy who started Guns N' Roses with Axl Rose, for people who don't know. And LA Guns themselves were a phenomenal band in the 80s and 90s. And not only that, the band consisted of Rudy Sarzo, who's, for me, is rock royalty. I've grown up with that name and his poster in my room since I was a kid. He was the bass player in Whitesnake from 87 to 94. He played with Ozzy. He played with Randy Rhoads. He's played with Blue Oyster Cult. Quiet Riot. It was just phenomenal to be on the road with these guys who are your idols. That was great. As well as that, and another gig that was kind of overlooked was we opened up for Eric Martin and Mr. Big, and he's another phenomenal. Like Mr. Big, as far as I know, are the biggest selling American rock band in Asia the whole time. That's a hell of an achievement. Yeah. We got up to perform their classic hit "To Be With You" with them, and Ronnie played keyboards and Andy played guitar, and I got to sing the backing vocal on it. That things like that is the reason that you go and you play in a band. It's why you go out in the lashings of rain and the snow and the wind to go and rehearse and spend hours in a freezing cold rehearsal studio to get these opportunities. And as long as you're getting the opportunities, it means you're doing something right. You're climbing the ladder. And I think Stone Trigger are definitely a band on the front foot at the moment.
Well, Tommy, I wish you all the best.
Thanks a lot, buddy.
Slithering down, bring us down. Black venom, yeah. choose the tattoo, stand up drunk and I'm born to live wild. Black